introduction. The introduction itself was like 40 pages long. Hope y'all enjoyed that.
Yeah, the introduction was.
It just
The whole book.
explains, for those of you who need a little catch up, wink wink, or didn't read it. North Americans live in a society that is deeply separate and unequal. Even despite best efforts, white people are socialized into a deeply internalized sense of racial superiority and are often angry when people bring it up. They focus on the white progressives, explain that the book will define white fragility and how it develops, and then how it protects racial inequality and what could be done to overcome it. So the question is, what is your previous experience discussing race and racism? Would anybody like to start?
Mine is simple. Coming up in the country, we were all family. So everybody I played baseball with, Thanksgiving, festivals, it was white, black, and you could tell the difference, but you didn't feel the racism.
You all sat out there together.
Yeah, it was the same people that was at the cookout were the same people we went to church with. It was all one big family, so it was different. And then I moved to Atlanta, and it was like, oh,
Yeah.
this is what they talk about.
Yeah.
Where in the country?
It's called Batesburg, Leesville. Yeah,
Batesburg.
close
That's
to-
South Carolina?
It's South Carolina.
Yeah, it's South Carolina.
Yeah. Even like the flags and all that, we didn't care because I guess we were uneducated about it, but it was like.
But they were there, you saw the Confederate flag.
Yeah, the Confederate flag was there, but it was like we were still outside at nighttime playing hide and go seek together. We were still playing baseball together. So mine was a little different from, I guess, city experience.
Mine, for me, I grew up in a melting pot of people in California. So I had friends of all races. We played together and things of like, that nature. But then when I got older and you get to college, you see more of a disparity in terms of who's there and who's not. What did your professors look like? And then you start examining all my doctors, everybody was white. And so then I learned that, okay, maybe there was, I don't know if it was an understanding of how far you could go, based on what you see. And then I moved to Charlotte, and I'm just looking around and I'm like, oh my God, the mayor is black, and my doctor is black, and the dentist is black, and the neighbor, and when I'm driving through certain neighborhoods and I'm looking at homes and where I'm from, homes like yours, you go through that neighborhood and you expect it to be white people living well, and black people walking out the door, white people, the Twilight Zone. But again, when it's not your experience, and so then you start to wonder what was different about here, because there was segregation here, but then you also have a lot of HBCUs. There was the networking you had to have. Where I grew up, the racism was not so overt, right? Because they didn't have the water fountains, and you weren't in separate classes in schools, but there were other things where you could clearly see, this is not for you. It wasn't explicitly stated, but I think it was implicit. So.
Okay, I'm a different generation. However, as I grew up, I was very, very sheltered. I didn't even know anything about, the bathrooms and all that kind of stuff. I didn't know anything about that. My parents didn't expose me to it. They made sure they didn't. Okay? My brothers knew all about it. My brothers are 6 and 8 years older than me. So they know all about it. But I didn't know anything. I thought it was a real treat when we go to the restaurant and we pull up on the outside and they bring our food out to us. I thought it was a real treat. But thinking about it, and it took me a while to figure that out. A long while. I was a full-grown adult. That the reason why we pulled up on the outside is because we weren't allowed to go on the inside. And see, I didn't know that. But in addressing your question there, I like I said, I was sheltered and grew up very naive. My dad was a minister, my mother was a librarian, okay? And I lived in nice neighborhoods all my life. I lived in nice homes all my life. And I like, my daughter can talk about the ghetto, but my daughter has never seen it, okay?
Right.
She can come back and she can talk like she was in it, but she's never, ever
That
seen
just
it.
has not been very.
So, you know, we all, especially as black persons, we all have different experiences. I didn't even go to school with people of any other race until I was in the 7th grade. Okay, and in the 7th grade, I did not see any differences. Nobody ever talked about race. When I went to high school, it was very different because nobody here knows about this, but Charlotte went through a very, very rough period when they started the busing and the desegregation.
We were the last school district in North Carolina to desegregate schools.
Wow.
I learned that in one of the reports.
My
I read.
girlfriend was bused.
Yeah, so I was bused. I was bused in the 10th grade, which that ages me, of course, because the 10th grade is where high school started, which I think it still should start at 10th grade. But, I was in the 10th grade. I went to school, and that's when, you know, I was really around a lot of white people. And, but I played in a band. We were all one big happy family.
So that was your
Literally,
connection,
we were
yeah.
all one big happy family. And I did not experience the racism. I can't recall at any point in time that I've ever been called an N-word to my face. Things like that. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't
Right.
happen.
For sure.
We never discussed race. We never discussed racism. I know why now. But we never discussed it. We never talked about it. We just loved each other as they were. But then, we, you know, when we have a party, it's all blacks. White people have their party over here. When we had our riots, because we had riots. I went to West Mecklenburg. Now, mind you, I went to West Mecklenburg. Where I lived, where I grew up, I was like a mile and a half from West Charlotte. So they bused me to West Mecklenburg.
That's so good.
They bused me to Coolwood because they didn't have any black people out.
My husband's mother, she got bused. She lived in Coolwood, and instead of going to West Meck, got bused. I can't remember the name of the school. It was across Charlotte, so it was like kind of the opposite. So it's just interesting.
And
So
Coolwood wasn't here.
It
Coolwood was
my
here?
dad went to Coolwood.
Coolwood was here. I went to
The building
Coolwood.
itself wasn't right in this neighborhood, was it?
Yes, it was. It's always been where it is now.
Yeah.
It's just a different school now.
Where is it?
Different type of school.
It's
right down the
Coolwood.
street.
It's another school. It's not a
Yeah.
different type of school.
Right down
It's
the
Well,
another
it
street.
says
school.
They've added to it,
Cause
but I
there's
mean,
it
it's
say
still,
like STEM Academy.
yeah, it's a magnet school,
Yeah.
but
Well, it's just
I
a
went to
fancy
Called
name.
Coolwood High School.
Yeah.
It's the
It's-
same school.
No.
no, it's, yeah, it's been middle
Oh,
school.
there's one in Huntersville called Coolwood High School. And it
Oh.
was the
Oh,
last
really?
Oh, I didn't know
opened
that.
all black school in Charlotte.
Oh, I
Oh,
never
really?
heard of that.
I've never heard of that school.
It's right near where Huntersville Aquatic Center, the Raymer Basketball Center.
That's still on this side then. It's not deep in Huntersville, right?
No,
Yeah.
I've
that's
never
on
heard of
this
that
side.
school.
I've never
right
heard
by
of
Lake
that.
Norman Charter.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Oh,
know Lake
no,
Norman
never
Charter
ever
is.
heard of that.
Oh, yeah.
I know where Lake Norman Charter is.
Yeah.
I know all of
Coolwood
that
High
area.
School over there.
Interesting.
Heck, I knew David Whitman. So,
Yeah, it's behind the Waymer Center.
yeah, he lived around the corner from me, grew up around the corner. From me.
Interesting.
Yeah, but we never talked about it.
Mhm.
And these open dialogues, I guess they're good, but if you've got one set that's in denial and one set pointing fingers, and I don't see what kind of dialogue can develop from that. What kind of good can come from a dialogue like that? And then nowadays, when they're trying to suppress all the information about the history, of course, you know, you can't act upon things unless you know what happened. Okay? If you're being denied learning about the true history, which is happening now, in censorships, book burnings, curriculum changes.
Florida,
Yeah,
Texas.
Florida all by itself.
Yeah, Florida and Texas.
Okay.
Look, you can end it with that.
You know,
Florida and Texas.
And you know, it's almost mute. There's a desire for people to live together, be together, and all this kind of stuff, but the true desire is not there. It's all a facade.
Yep.
That is what I see, not necessarily what I feel. I went to a predominantly white college. I've lived in very diverse neighborhoods. I live in a very diverse neighborhood right now. Because, you know, I want my children to grow up knowing everybody, appreciating everybody's culture. That's just the way it is.
Ms. Wilson.
I was just quickly add, so I am from Charlotte, so I grew up in the northwest part of Charlotte.
Okay.
So I went to Coolwood Middle School, but then I also went to Hopewell High School. And just my experience in school in CMS, one thing that race wasn't really talked about, but I noticed at Coolwood, I was in the minority versus going to Hopewell and Huntersville. I mean, it was predominantly white. And so it really just kind of made me start thinking about CMS and just how segregated CMS is to an extent. And I remember when I first started teaching and we had our new teacher orientation for teachers at Title I schools, and I can't remember his name, but he was presenting and he really talked about the history of Charlotte, and I don't know if it's called redlining or how they basically they determined which areas, and it really affected
Really a lot of it.
the value, like home value, and like how it just
That determined who went to
and
what
it
school.
really, in a sense, segregated the city, even though it's not legally segregated.
It
It's
is.
de facto.
And you see it in the schools. Like I saw both sides, and it just, I don't know. It was interesting from that perspective of just.
You can have,
Follow up
yeah.
and we can move on to the next one.
Okay.
I'm not from Charlotte, toward the mountains, kind of, and I was also the minority in all of my schools. So race wasn't necessarily like talked about, but it was always like, I mean, the white girl, or like, which has hurt my feelings, but like it was always talked about that like there weren't a lot of other white kids at my school, and which was fine. And then I went to a college that was also mostly African American, UNCG. Also a liberal arts.
Well, that.
So constantly just surrounded by culture. And then the first job I ever had teaching was at Cornelius Elementary.
Oh my God.
Different word.
Oh,
Not
what
a
a
single
culture
black kid
shock.
in the entire school. Yeah, almost like an opposite culture shock. I maybe had 30 black kids in my 10 years teaching there, total.
I believe that.
And they were mostly like, I had Mark Fields, the old Panthers player, his daughter. I had like, they were all upper,
Cornelius.
yeah.
Right.
They were not Title I. I mean, the PTA raised $100,000 a year, you know.
Yeah.
And they didn't have to give half of it away, did they? Y'all had all
not.
100K.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
auctions and renting out country clubs for our retreat. Like,
Yeah.
just a different world. And you think like, I used to say like, oh, this is fantastic. I'm never leaving here, you
And
know.
that's still in Mecklenburg County.
Right. But then I just refused to like, I'm not a rule follower. I like to cross the line, and I was not good at talking to parents. I cannot put up with the entitlement of some of that, and like, that ultimately was like my final, fine, I'll go do something else somewhere else. And actually being here, back in a more melting pot, diverse place, you're happier, you're more comfortable, like, and I don't think a lot of people see it that way.
It's more like the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Chapter 1. The challenges of talking to white people.
About racism.
About racism. So I thought it was really cool because our group does have people of both races and generations. So we can talk about it with more understanding, I think, that especially all of us who work in a school system and deal with multiple races of multiple parents and people and grandparents and all of that. I personally, when I was thinking about the group, didn't think of anybody that would be considered fragile, as she likes to put it. So her job is to go into these places, these companies, and teach people about racism. And like she always says, it's the white men who get the angriest because they don't want to accept that something is wrong with what they're doing because they feel so successful. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be white men, obviously, but that's what our
Because they feel like they're right.
Yeah, that's the ideology of it. So, the chapter is thinking about engaging in the topic of race. Like, how do you start talking about race? How do you engage in a way that isn't, I guess, like, it's meaningful, but not just like talking about race.
You don't want it to be offensive.
Right. You don't want it to be offensive, and like, we don't want to talk about race all the time. So like, if everybody acknowledges it, then why do we have to keep talking about it, I guess, is kind of what she was saying. But then also just knowing that the encounters you have every day with people of different races might affect them differently than how you think it does. So, how can you use the information from this chapter in your role as an educator?
I would think just awareness, especially we have such a high ML population, and understanding who our kids are, what their parents are probably experiencing, right? As adults, everyone, I'll hear people and people online, especially, everybody's really, really gangster behind a keyboard, and an anonymous name, but you'll hear, oh, you're illegal, and it's like, you don't know that there are legal people who live in this country who are of different races. It's like, you must be an illegal and where are your papers and those types of things. So that's very hard, and then I'm sure that transfers on to our kids. So one of the things that I'm always aware of is making sure that they feel safe, that you do belong here, you have a space here. You'll have some kids sometimes who don't want to speak their native language, and I'm like, no, tú hablas español, you speak in your language. I have my app and everything. I'm like, that is okay. Like, your language is valued. You have no idea when you can speak 2 languages, how valuable that is as opposed to only speaking one. So I think just awareness of what's going on in the world. Politics is a part of it, and a lot of the nonsense and the noise, tuning that down a little bit, not getting into politics, but for when Donald Trump was president and these raids and people being in fear of their lives and just chasing down anybody who looks, and just giving that authority to those people and what the children could have possibly experienced, going up to school, raiding places, we're just gonna raid and anybody who's not, that's just not cool, right? So those types of things, just an awareness of what other people are probably dealing with based on whatever the temperature is in the country. Because the kids will hear their parents talking, right?
That was based off, when I was reading the first chapter, a quote that stood out to me thinking about this was it says, setting aside your sense of uniqueness is a critical skill that will allow you to see the bigger picture of the society in which you live, and individualism will not. And that stood out to me now thinking about this, like, you have to set yourself aside to understand, like, what you're walking into. And racism was a whole different conversation, but
it's hard to talk about. People don't like to talk about it because I hear people, I like everybody, so do I.
Yeah.
That's not what race ism, and ism is a system, but you have to get deep.
I think a misinterpretation of that word is always a big
That's true.
thing.
Not even understand what it is.
Right. And her talking about having a bias, unconscious versus a conscious bias, she talks about, people are so quick to be like, she gives those statements, I don't see color.
I don't.
But like, and that used to be, I was even thinking when you were talking about the EL thing 10 years ago, they didn't want them to speak Spanish, right?
No.
It was to speak English. So even that has progressed as we've been in the educator role, to let them retain their culture and retain their language. And then so same thing with like talking about everybody's the same, I don't see color, like that can't be true.
But it's also like, even like you're saying, they speak the language. For those that look Spanish but don't speak any Spanish. So, for example, Jaden was, I don't know what grade, 2nd grade I think he was, and he was like, Mommy, we have a new kid. I'm like, okay, good. He's like, well, yeah, but my teacher told me, he said beside me because I need to help him because he speaks Spanish. And I'm like, okay, and did you tell your teacher that you don't speak?
Right.
And he's like, no. And I was like, okay, I'll call her. So that's when I had it. You know, like, don't assume something
Right.
without
Just-
asking.
you
First
just
of all, if he
because.
wants to help, because it's not his job.
I'm
Yeah,
about to
that's
say,
true
baby, he's
too.
not the teacher.
So, and second of all, it's also like, you're already saying, oh, well, he looks like this, so I'm just gonna.
I'm
put
just
him
gonna,
Yeah.
right.
It's a judgment.
I
So
was-
She
I
should have
was-
pulled him
Yeah.
aside and said, "Do you speak Spanish?" baby?"
I've
And
seen
if
that
he does,
this
then
year.
Do you mind working with this?
I've seen that
You know,
this
that
year,
kind of thing.
and I'm just like, my baby Emma, I love Emma so much.
Emma Solano.
Solano.
I love her so much.
Oh, you gotta know a story too.
But you know, she was just, I forgot who it was, but the kid sat beside her because they were Spanish, and I was like, Emma, what did he say? She was like, I don't know. I was like, okay.
She don't even know
She
what
don't
we doing
Yeah,
right
she
now.
said, I don't know.
That
I
sounds
said,
like
yeah.
my Emma.
Yeah, that's my girl.
Yeah.
But yeah,
That's
just,
how it is.
yeah, and a lot of the kids I went to school with did not speak Spanish.
But even like
But they
the
were
like the kinders right now, they are, whew,
Yeah.
Yeah.
these Spanish ones.
Yeah.
But like them just hearing me speak to them in Spanish and they're like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dang it.
Very shocked.
They are,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's-
Yeah, yeah, all of it. I think the biggest challenge is if you acknowledge, you can't fix a problem if you don't acknowledge that there is one.
And that's what our problem is.
That's our problem. That's pretty
And
much
taking
it.
the
All
time
over.
to actually
All
learn.
over.
That's,
To try to,
that's-
like you said, I don't know who said it, removing self and just saying, okay, what is this about, right? Because the belief then would be, well, all these people should be at the bottom and we're here simply because that's just what it is to be black, right?
No,
You know?
maybe because we were here first, I don't know, but
Mhm.
everybody's an immigrant in America.
That's true.
In the
think
United
so.
States,
Yeah.
everyone,
Yeah,
everyone.
'cause I don't
is
see
an
any
immigrant.
indigenous people in our
No.
school, they're got here.
There aren't actually. I've been looking for a speaker for Native American Heritage Month.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have any.
No,
So,
No, we're zero.
yeah.
anybody else like to jump in?
I've used my like extra language features with my kinders a lot too. So I can do like a side by side where there's English and Spanish, and they like the kids love it. But actually, the first couple times I used it, my English speaking kids were like, "I don't know what this is saying. I don't know those words," and I was like, "Is that kind of challenging?" You
There
know,
it
like,
is.
Yeah,
The
there you go.
reality,
I was
this is
like,
what they
it can be
feel.
really hard.
Sitting in class with Miss Barnes, she make the English kids speak Spanish. So she'll translate it and then she'll teach them and she makes them
Oh,
use
that's
it. It's
good.
cool.
Well, it's like,
really
it's
cool.
like your grandson. And like my granddaughter, I mean, she'll be 2 in a couple of weeks, but she's learning Spanish. She's also learning sign, okay?
Oh, that's nice.
And she can speak English really well.
So like,
Too well,
but also
probably.
like Jimena was supposed to go to a bilingual school, cause once they don't have to take a test during kinder, right? So she's going in. And I took her out, moved her back to Concrete because I had an encounter with the teacher, she was Colombian. And sometimes you do it again to your own race. And she was like, well, everything's gonna be in Spanish because this is a bilingual school and you need to teach her, that is your job. I said, excuse me? I'm like, we're in America, so it's English first. I'm like, and second of all, that's not how you speak to me.
Absolutely,
like-
that would have been first for me.
That's
Miss
crazy.
Webb, if you are in
That
the
has
building,
nothing to
can
do
you
with
please
that.
call
Like,
to the front office? You have a guest waiting for you
Yeah.
You
here.
already know what
Miss
that's
Webb.
about.
Yeah, you already know what it is.
Mhm.
Cause that racism, it comes in all colors.
That's true.
And it's in all races.
And
And it's
it
not
is. There's so many
necessarily,
isms.
a lot of it is intrinsic, you know, it's within that.
Within
Yeah.
your own culture.
Well,
Yeah.
even like when you were
No
mentioning
prejudices.
Cornelius, like that's an affluentism, right? And an expectation my kids get and
True.
have everything because our kids here are not there, you know, with that whole entitlement thing. So there's so many layers.
And if they are, it's a different kind
It's way
of
different.
entitlement.
It's
It's a
way
different
different.
level.
Besides, like we talked about assuming somebody speaks Spanish, like, are there any other things you all have seen with educators that like, maybe white people need to be aware of?
Well, one of the things that I'm saying, and it was me too, like there's an assumption because a certain group of kids may perform at a certain level, you'll just assume to put them here until they prove you wrong. we often have a more positive view of our Asian students. Well, all Asian people are smart. I can attest to that. It's not true, right? By far, right? I went to some school with some, and I'm like, oh my God, like, you are not. But again, that stereotype often will put people in certain rooms just because of what you look like. And people would look at our school, if you watch our kids dismiss, you would not expect us to be a B school. Look at these kids, they're speaking Spanish and everything else, so this is not a good school, right? But then you look, but you're surprised.
Yeah.
But if you go to Cornelius, or if you're out in Huntersville, or you're in South Charlotte, that's the expectation. And I think that's the difference with some educators, and they feel like they're helping the child by, well, this is too hard for you, so I'm gonna give you this.
Exactly.
And I'm gonna dumb it down for you, and they feel like they're doing a good thing.
Right.
But you would not expect that of your own.
Exactly.
So I think that keeping the expectations and
Yeah.
taking out everything you know or what you believe in every stereotype, because we all have the bias.
We
right?
do, and I want to be in all these book studies because y'all are having such a great conversation. I think the expectation part, and I think that again, many times it's not a conscious. It's like especially in a Title I environment, like they can't, but we have to. My philosophy has always been, when I was a classroom teacher, teach all of them as if they're gifted, and that has yielded a lot of success for me because I believe that. Don't have that expectation high. I think the other thing is we all bring stuff and being aware. So I'm gonna be vulnerable and share. So I can remember being at the mall, and I may have shared this with some people, and I saw a group of black boys, hoodies, just looking like a group of teenage black boys. But it made me feel a little bit of fear. And I'm like, this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm like, why? I'm leaving Firebirds. Why did I have that feeling? Well, society has made many people feel like young black boys thug, young black boys, they're gonna be a thief, young black boys, they might try to attack you. And I'm like, I'm a black woman with a black son, so I felt that. I reflected on it, and I said, my son is gonna be that. Those boys are probably just like my son, and he's going to be a teenager, so now he's 12, so now my son is the young black boy with the hoodie on,
Right.
and no one's thinking he comes from a professional home. His mother is a principal. His dad works for Continental, and he's such and such, and he is this, and he's in the 99th percentile. He's a whatever the top TD. I have to brag on my baby. Whatever the top one is, I don't know. He AI, he's brilliant. Nobody's looking at them. They're looking at him like the black boy in the hoodie. And if it was easy for me to feel like that with a group of young black boys because of. And I know, and I'm very racially conscious, and I'm all of that, and I'm very aware, and I'm very all of that. But society somehow put something in my brain that made me respond like that.
That's right.
And it's real, because now I'm scared.
Yeah.
Now the fact that I have a 12-year-old, my son is getting bigger. He's getting bigger. Now I'm scared. I'm living in fear.
You have to have that talk with him.
Yeah, I mean, we have some, but I'm scared.
And it's not like
I want to just
doing anything, they're just walking.
I want to flash forward. I want him to have his childhood, but I want to flash forward to at least being a man, because I'm like, maybe he could, I don't know, but then it's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary.
It's so sad that you have to worry about that you have that fear.
Well,
Then
guess what?
That you have to have that
I
fear.
have to have that fear
You do.
for my
Guess
black
what?
son.
I have one that's turning 40 on Friday.
And you still have that
And
fear.
I have one that's 33, and I still have that same fear.
And that's not okay.
It's
Well,
not.
Jermaine,
It's not
Jermaine,
okay.
they talked to Legend and Avery in children's language about these things already.
Yeah.
And Legend is 7 and Avery is 9.
But why should we have to?
We shouldn't.
We
But
should.
it's
Mr. Johnson got
No,
something. He the black man in the
Yeah.
room.
And I was gonna say the same with you. My dog and I, we were walking. This was last week, and I heard a buggy behind me, and it was a black guy in the hoodie pushing the buggy. We was on
Miss
the
Wood, you have
trail.
delivery in the front office.
I don't
Miss
feel
Jody
like
Wood,
running,
you have
but-
delivery in the
Yeah.
front office.
But I'll
Start
do it.
jogging just to make sure.
Because your senses
It's,
immediately
yeah,
just
and I was worried. I was like, man, I'm not afraid, but it's just the fact that it hit my mind that there's a black dude behind me with a buggy. I don't know what's going on. I'm running.
right. And he
He
might
come by
just be
me,
pushing his child.
He was
He didn't pay
going to the
anybody,
store.
did he?
He didn't even look at me.
But would you have had that same thought if it were a white man.
I wouldn't.
It's a lower
But-
sense
But
of.
it's, yeah.
But
And
society has
felt-
done
I felt
this
so bad.
to
us.
felt-
I have that feeling
Anybody
with
bigger
everybody.
than
Women, I think is different.
Yeah.
Anybody
Cause I have that
who has-
feeling with
That's
everybody.
just
They
me.
can be black, white, purple, green,
Yeah.
yellow.
Living in the
Yeah.
hood, that's just me. I'm head on the sweat. I don't trust anybody.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things, like, I'm like you, I'm very aware, I love, our kids, I love my culture, I know all the things, but we have, there was a boy, I'd already started, I was at Druid Hills, and I'd already started, and a little boy joined my class, and I didn't test him. I put him in the lowest group. And then when I said, Lord, have mercy, this boy reads off the charts. And I felt so bad, because why did I assume it? Of course I corrected it, but I didn't even give him the same courtesy, and all my kids were black.
Right.
I didn't give him the same, I just assumed most of the boys in my class were low. I just threw him in that group. I'll never forget him, sweetest pie, handsome little boy. I bet he was looking at me like, what?
Why
But
you doing
But when you
that?
have those
Easy
experiences and you're able to be vulnerable and say it, you'll never make that mistake.
Oh, never, I have not.
I
have
think
not
that's the
made that
part that's
mistake again.
missing with a lot of educators, especially white educators, is taking that time to really reflect on why did I have this fear? Why did I have this assumption? Like, where is that coming from? And learning from it.
That's that reflective piece, and that's hard.
Because I
And
feel
it's
like
hard
that's
for
not
all
always the case.
educators to be in that position, like, coming from Cornelius, there are teachers that are gonna retire there. They started there, they're gonna retire there. They're never gonna go anywhere
They have,
else.
it's
They're
always, that's
never
their
gonna
concept.
get that experience.
Yeah.
Even when I was there for the 10 years that I was there, I knew that I grew up racially aware, because that's just the people I grew up around. But some of those people were from Cornelius. They went to those schools. Like, they'll never have it. And then they'll
And they
go to
live
Chapel
there.
Hill, or
Yeah.
there's no wrong now. Or
No,
NC
there's
State or
nothing wrong with
something,
going
but-
to Chapel Hill.
That's funny.
they'll never want to be in this situation because it'll make them uncomfortable. And sometimes I feel like even the general public that are not educators, I feel like that's why a predominant amount of public educators tend to be more liberal, not to bring politics into it, because we see it every day, all day,
So true.
front lines, the whole thing. And people are like, why you gotta talk about race? Why you gotta do this? And they're mad at teachers because we're teaching all these things, in between sex changes in the nurse's office. We're also teaching race. And
We got money for that.
right,
I can't get my standing desk, but we got. That's right.
That's
Right.
right.
You're right. You're right.
But then we just have like it has to be talked about. That's the thing. You can't ignore it. And that's what I don't think the general public understands.
No,
Because it
they
doesn't
don't
affect them
understand it because they're really happy just the way they are.
And what they do see and hear is from the news, and
Right.
that's where they get a lot of the misconceptions,
Yeah,
or
and
social
they
media.
get so blown up in the media. And they're just trying to